My name is Jonah Jonathan, and thanks for tuning in. Today I've had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing jazz bassist Avery Sharpe, one of the top bassists in jazz who worked with a lot of greats including McCoy Tyner and lives in Massachusetts. And we just had a wonderful time talking about jazz and life and all things that might be interesting to you. So thanks for tuning into the Jazz Musician's Voice. Please subscribe and stay tuned for future interviews. Thank you. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, today I have the great opportunity to interview bassist Avery Sharpe, one of the top bassists in jazz. Now, Avery, I understand you were born in Georgia. Can you tell us a little bit about your early upbringing and what you were into musically at the time?
Well, I was born in Georgia. I'm number 6 of 8 children. My father was in the service, and he originally fought during World War II. He was in the Navy, and then he got out and couldn't handle the racism in the South, so went back into the service because originally he was born in Georgia as well, and he moved to Florida as a kid, and that's where he met my mother. And at the time that I was born, we were stationed in Valdosta, Georgia, which I'm sure everyone has heard of. And then when I was a couple of months old, we moved to Guam for a couple of years and then came back to Savannah, Georgia. So my early memories of Georgia, it was a segregated South. We weren't allowed to go to certain areas. As a matter of fact, I didn't go back to Savannah until I became an adult. I did the Savannah Jazz Festival years later. And then I found out that most of the black people lived in West Savannah. And it used to be interesting because when I started going on the road, and I told people, well, I lived in Savannah for 7 years as a kid. And they would say, well, Savannah's a beautiful city. And I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? Because we were only allowed in our section, unless you were an adult and you were working for somebody, or somebody, white household or something like that. And I always just remember this smell. I thought it was a slaughterhouse, but my mother said I think they made either furniture or luggage, and that smell always just came to our area. It was just, I guess it's comparable to environmentalists. They always put a lot of the trash and waste in the in the black community or people of color's community, and but anyway, we weren't allowed to go to certain areas. We just weren't allowed. And as a kid, I just never understood that because I could, my older brother was a little more adventurous than the rest of us. He would go to the white section just as a dare, and my parents would get upset because you could get beat up or lynched. And I never could understand as a kid that we weren't allowed to go to their areas, but a white person could walk down the street as if they owned it, and everyone would speak to them, and it was no big deal. As a kid, I just couldn't figure that one out. But my early musical experiences, were in Georgia in terms of just the sounds, and because I was raised in the Pentecostal church, Church of God in Christ, Sanctified Church, and my mother's a piano player, so. Of course, all the kids, like I said, I'm number 6, and I was the baby at the time of 8 kids. And so we all got piano lessons, but we're 2 years apart up to me. So then I got a chance to be with my mother for 6 years. So I went everywhere that she went. I went to all, and people don't understand about the Holiness Pentecostal Church, especially during that time. You just didn't go to church on Sunday. You went to church all week. Sunday was a wash. You went to Sunday school at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. to about 11:30 was Sunday school. Then from about 11:45 to 2 o'clock, or whenever the Lord touched the minister's heart to let us go, could be 2:30 sometimes. Then you would go home and you would eat. And they had what they call YPWW, which was basically, I guess, the equivalent of what Catholics would call catechism, where you have Bible study. So it was young people's Bible study at 6:30, from 6:30 to almost 8 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock that night, you would go to regular church service. That was just your entire Sunday. Monday night you might be off. Tuesday night you might have prayer. Wednesday night might be women's night or another Bible study. Thursday night was choir rehearsal. Friday night was regular service. It was just a regular service on Friday evenings. Because as a kid, by then, like I was getting back a little bit back to Georgia, my father got stationed to Plattsburgh, New York. So I didn't have any white friends until we got to Plattsburgh, New York. He was stationed there for about a year and a half. And he was 39 years old at the time, had fought World War II, been support for the Korean War. He was 39, had 7 kids, and they wanted to send him to Vietnam. He was like, see ya. And he didn't want to go back south because, in the mid-60s, it was still, pretty funky. And so my mother had done a church revival in Springfield, Massachusetts, with one of the ministers from Plattsburgh, New York, and she told my father about Springfield because they had Chicopee Air Force Base in Chicopee, which was an active Air Force base. And she said, it would be a good place if he wanted to retire to get out of service, and there was wouldn't have to go back down south, and he could get his benefits and so forth from having been in. Started out in the Navy and then went back and it was in the Air Force. And I think that might have been like April of 1965. I was a kid. And my father said, yeah, we're going to Massachusetts. I said, we don't know anybody in Massachusetts. We don't have any relatives there. And he goes, exactly. And that's how we wound up in Springfield. He really didn't know anybody. My mother got more, got more gigs playing in the church. Actually, it's funny, during that time, the Pentecostal church didn't really pay their musicians. They would have like appreciation service like every year for this, they would invite choirs and they would raise a bunch of money, but they didn't really pay the musicians, and not like it is now. I mean, of course, now they have bands. But during that time, my mother would have to go play at the Baptist churches that did pay you, because the Pentecostal churches wouldn't pay you. And so when she got to Springfield, she actually went to play for a Baptist church, because at our church, she played for free. And plus, the minister's son was also the piano player, the organ player at that time. So, it was musically, going back to Georgia, the Pentecostal churches were definitely more, they were storefront churches. Storefront churches are, there's not like a big cathedral. It's like formerly an abandoned building that somebody wants to start a church, so it might have been an abandoned former grocery store or laundromat or something. And the minister starts his church, especially Pentecostal ministers during that time, and in the South. So, we'd be playing piano. And because I was the baby, I had to go everywhere that she went. And the sounds, and anyone who knows anything about the Pentecostal Holy Roller Church, is that, we don't mess around, we get down, So when people have seen people getting happy, speaking in tongues, the choir, people running up and down the aisles, that's the church that I come out of. So the services were intense, the music was intense. Actually, some of the rhythms that I heard there were some of the rhythms that I used later on in my compositions, and I've composed everything from solo instrument up to orchestras and choirs. And so some of those rhythms that I heard as a child, because in those church services, it would just be an upright piano, and you might have one of the sisters playing a wash tub or washboard. Washboard is, as a metal, before they had electric washers and stuff like that, they would have a board which would have ripples in it, and then you would wash your clothes, you would scrub them. Yeah. It's very country, very basic. And they would use those as an instrument. Person would take a thimble and go along the ribs, to get a rhythm like shaka-daka-duck, shaka-daka-duck, shaka-daka-duck. And, you might have somebody playing a bass drum or, and tambourines. So those were the kind of rhythms and kind of services that I came up as a kid. And when we went to Plattsburgh, in the north, which is supposed to be a little bit more sophisticated, you had people who you know, it's just like when the great black migration happened from the south to the north, people still bought those sort of basic values and approaches to life to the north. You know, they were more rural. They weren't, as I said, you know, as educated, as supposedly as sophisticated. And so we went to Plattsburgh, New York. We lived on base, so there weren't as many opportunities for us to go to the Holiness Church as we did when we were in the South. But when we moved to Springfield, those, you know, that was different because they did have a, you know, Pentecostal church, Holy Roller churches. And so, and like I said, you know, getting back to what I was talking about before, about the church services, you know, Sunday was a wash, Tuesday might have a prayer, and, you know, went through that whole thing. And Friday night you had regular church service, 8 o'clock, 8 to 10 or 8 to 10:30. Saturday, you would be off, maybe, unless they had a special program. Then they may have a fellowship. You might have other churches come together and you have a program, and then Sunday the whole thing starts over again. But because my mother was a piano player, they also had traveling evangelists. So sometimes an evangelist would come to your church. You might be, you know, friends with the minister, and the minister would say, okay, for this week, we're going to have church every night, and we're going to have this special guest minister, and everyone comes to church every night. So I would be there every night with my mother because she had to play piano for, you know, for the services. And so the minister might be there a week, and he might, if the Lord touched his heart, he would be there an extra week, i.e. they didn't raise enough money for him the first week. So those were the kind of things that, you know, that I was exposed to as a kid. And I started playing piano at 8 years old because my mother gave us all piano lessons. But it kind of stuck with me because I was the first one to actually be able to spend time with my mother. Everybody were 2 years apart up to me. Then I got 6 years between me and my baby sister, and then 6 years between my baby sister and my baby brother. So I got a chance to really hang with my mother and be with my mother. And so that's where the music comes from. And, you know, I was also into sports a lot. So I would go in and out playing music and playing sports. So when we got here to Springfield, when I was in junior high, I took accordion, which is strange for a black kid in Massachusetts to take accordion. Probably would have worked better in Louisiana, in New Orleans or Zydeco. But I was a strange kid, and they thought the Sharpes were strange anyway. Plus, I could fight, so people kind of left me alone. But I used to play, you know, Lady of Spain. I played James Brown tunes on accordion. I used to kid. I did an interview years ago on WBGO, and Dorothy Kirk, you know, Ross and Roland Kirk's widow, heard me tell this story where I used to kid people that, you know, Rossan has this version of the old rugged cross that he does, which is killing. But I tell people I was the first one to do the old rugged cross in church. So I preceded, you know, it's a joke, I preceded Rossan and Roland Kirk. So I used to play stuff like the old rugged cross in church. And then that lasted for a couple of years. And then, you know, like a lot of adolescent males, you know, I started getting interested in girls, and I thought that, you know, I was listening to a lot of different music. And also in the church, the Pentecostal church, you're not supposed to listen to music that's not church music. So my mother bought in, you know, like, she bought in like Shirley Caesar, James Cleveland, Mahalia Jackson, you know, Blind Boys of Alabama, you know, she bought in those kind of records. But my father was not in the church. He supported whatever she did, but he was not in the church, so he would bring in Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and he was also listening to what my older brothers and sisters were listening to, you know, Motown stuff, Stax record stuff, you know, James Brown, Isaac Hayes, Johnny Taylor. So he was listening to that kind of stuff. So it was a good mixture of music as well. So when I became a teenager, you know, like I said, you become interested in girls, and I thought girls liked bass players. And so I started playing bass, and I saw some of my friends playing bass. And then once I got into the electric bass, and once I got into it, then I was like, well, forget about girls for a hot second. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. I just played all the time. I did sports. After I, come home from school, I would go practice until about, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. My mother understood it because she was a musician. My father thought I just was gone. And then, so I did a lot of playing, and now, I also played in the church. But I also had, my mother was a very progressive Pentecostal person, because I wasn't supposed to be playing music of the world or the devil's music. I was supposed to be playing just church music. But she actually knew that actually my mother never saw me playing in a club, but she would drop me off to play in clubs, at 16, because I wasn't driving at that time. And years later, when I became an adult, I said, Mom, that's pretty avant-garde. You're a fine church-going woman, upstanding in the community, and it's against our religion to visit clubs. She goes, she never went in. She goes, well, I figured the people in the congregation, they call them saints. She goes, I figured if the saints, they weren't supposed to be there, so if they did, they were busted. But she never came in. She always would drop me off because she knew I was there for the music, and she understood that. I mean, I could have gotten into a lot of devilment, but she trusted me, and a lot of my friends did get into a whole lot of devilment, but I was there just for the music. The music has always been, has always drawn me in. And then, once I got to high school, then I went to college at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which was an incredible period of, in the mid 1970s. Actually, it was funny, I was talking to my oldest sister today. I was telling her that, I reminded her that my brother Jim, who passed some years ago, he's 8 years older than me, but he's the one that convinced me to go to the University of Massachusetts. I was supposed to go to Springfield College. I was a physical education major. For some unknown reason, I thought I wanted to be a gym teacher for about 6 months. And Springfield College had a great physical education department. Major was like one of the top in the country. And I got in, and we lived 3 houses from Springfield College. But my brother Jim said, no, you need to go to UMass. There's a whole lot more happening. And I was like, whatever. So he drugged me up there. I met a few of the deans. And I said, okay, I'll apply. I applied and I got in. And then once I got there, I lasted in, let me see, the semester starts in September. By the time the end of October rolled around, I realized I did not want to do physical education. So luckily UMass had a lot to offer, and I was getting more and more into music. And then I found out that Max Roach was there. I didn't really know who Max was. I found out. It's like father of bebop music.
Yeah.
Archie Sharpe was there. I mean, Max was living in Amherst at the time. And Archie Sharpe, Reggie Workman was my first bass teacher on upright. I started getting more and more into upright, and he was coming up a couple days a week from Brooklyn, I believe it was. And Horace Boyer, who was one of the most foremost historians in gospel music and also a gospel performer in his own right, Fred Tillis, Dr. Tillis, who actually started the whole jazz program and helped bring people like Max up there. Billy Taylor, I believe, was working on his master's or doctorate at that time. He was being affiliated with UMass. Bill Cosby, before his name became a bad word, was working on his master's and his doctorate. Remember, the cartoon he did, Fat Albert, I think that was like his doctoral thesis. And his wife was, worked on her master's, and I believe eventually got her doctorate from UMass. So you had a lot of people there. I mean, that was a special time. I mean, that time has not been duplicated. And Archie Sharpe took me under his wing, Horace Boyer, and they really worked with me because I guess they saw something in me. And the funny thing about it, to show you how rudiment I was at the time, I couldn't even get into Max's ensemble because I couldn't read chord changes. And I was playing electric bass, and I couldn't get into his ensemble. And then the next year I got into his ensemble because David Gage, who does the
Yeah, the bass master.
Bass master, yeah. Dave was a couple years older than me. And, Dave is from Amherst. And I couldn't wait for Dave to graduate so I could get the gig with Max. And it's funny, I didn't know how much Max dug me. And I always tell people that, every major drummer that I've played with from 1980 till now, a lot of these cats are not here anymore. I played with, Elvin, Art Taylor, Louis Hayes, Jack DeJohnette, God. And all these guys, the first thing when I play with them, they say, dang, your time is really good. Remember I did a recording with Art Taylor and McCoy Tyner, and Art said, Avery, I got to tell you something, man. You got a great time. He goes, I did a little something. You didn't budge. I did a little more. He said, you didn't move an iota. And he said, then I just started playing my regular stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Max Roach was the one that taught me how to listen to drummers and really got me focused in on rhythm, because people don't know how to, even musicians don't know how to talk to drummers. They just say, oh yeah, that thing that Tony Williams did on the bridge of such and such, why don't you play that? And the drummer's looking at you like, well, you don't have Tony Williams here, you got me. And that could be, he played a whole lot of things on the bridge. Which particular thing do you want?
Yeah.
So people, musicians don't know how to talk to drummers, and they don't know how to listen to drummers. Max taught me how to listen to drummers, in that, drummers using all four extremities. Like you could be right-handed or you could be left-handed, but you could be left-footed and right-footed. We're not machines, so your right hand might be a little stronger, than your left hand, or your feet at the same. So you have to listen to each extremity. Mm-hmm. And you're like, so now, he said the cat, on his right hand might be right-handed and might be riding a little ahead of the beat on his right hand, but if you listen to his snare, he's there. So people, they're listening to the cymbal, the ride cymbal, and it feels like the drummer's rushing. I'm like, no, he's there. You just have to listen to it. And spoiler alert, I hate to tell band directors, you tell your kids to listen to the hi-hat on 2 and 4, and yes, you do, but that's not all there is. Yeah. Because there's a lot, there's a lot of space between 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So, which is correct, but there's a lot of micro rhythms in between there that you have to kind of really pick up. But, listening to the four extremities, you still have to find, where do I place that note? Where's the center of all that? Where is that going? So that's how I listen to the drummer. It's like, oh, I hear where he's at. I can tell after the first tune, his coordination. Okay, boom, this is where I drop the note and keep it there. Mm-hmm. And so drummers go, oh, wow. It's like, yeah, because I know where I'm listening to you. I'm listening not just to one or two things. I'm listening to everything that you do to make, to make things jive or swing, So Max taught me that, and also practicing with a metronome. I still practice with a metronome religiously. And people say, well, if you practice with a metronome, you become dependent on it. That's not true, because you take away the metronome. And when you get on the bandstand, we're not metronomes, but it helps me to decipher where the beat is. I play ahead of the beat, I play right on the beat, I play behind the beat. I practice all that because, like I said, we're human beings. Max said nobody's a metronome, and it's funny how that happened with we were having a class, and that particular day, either class got canceled, it was a holiday, I don't remember, but myself and a great drummer, Royal Hardigan, showed up, who was actually, when I met Royal was a piano player, and then he got into, after he met Max, he just went crazy and studied everything Max did. And Royal and I were there, and that was the day that Max sat me down and just told me how to listen, taught me how to listen to drummers. I was like, and that stuck with me, and I have used that, to this day. So I always give Max credit in terms of me being able to play with any drummer, because I know how to listen to them. And as I said before, Reggie Workman was coming up a couple days. He was my first bass teacher, and because Reggie heard me play electric, I'd only been playing a couple years, and he was like, "Wow, man!" He goes, "You really got that under your hand." And it was self-taught. He goes, "I'm not telling you to stop playing." He goes, "That's your generation," but he said, "Focus all your energy into upright." And what he told me was true, and I'm glad he told me that. He said, "You're gonna want to quit," because he knew that it required, first of all, the whole callus thing that you got to develop. It's painful,
physical.
And so I was, I'm walking around campus, daggone near in tears, because the upright is kicking my behind. But I always just remember him saying, "Don't quit. You're gonna want to quit, but don't." And I was thinking, nobody's gonna hire me for this thing. This is like in the mid 70s. So everyone's playing electric, but I focused and got through it. And I only studied with Reggie a year, but the things that he taught me didn't really sink in until 2 or 3 years later, because from day one he taught me upright. And I have a funny story. Reggie's probably going to kill me for this, but this is, he's from the old school, which is great, because nowadays, students are handled more. They're more coddled, we're softer, and but Reggie's from the old school, and sometimes the old school, really, those lessons that they teach you stay with you for the rest of your life. My second lesson with Reggie, I was not prepared. I come into, we're there for the lessons. He's sitting down at a desk. He just, he's coming back and forth from Brooklyn. I'm sure he's tired. So I started playing. And he looks at me, he goes, "You're jiving." Waves at me, puts his head down at the desk, and goes to sleep. I was like, I can't believe this cat just canceled on me. And went, like, since I'm not going to waste my time with you. After that, I was prepared for every lesson and then some. He never had any more problems out of me after that. But that's the way cats were. It toughened you up, but it also made you realize the seriousness of the music. He said, "You're jiving. You're not prepared. No, I'm not going to waste my time with you." And after that, I was fine. And he taught me, like I said, the stuff that he was teaching me didn't really click until 2 or 3 years later. And I always, give him credit. It was funny because my first year of doing lessons with him, when guys would come through town, major bass players, I'd say, I'm Avery Sharpe, I've been playing for a year, and they would see my hands, and they were like, "You play like Reggie Workman." I'm like, "Well, yeah, he's my bass teacher." And I was listening a lot to Coltrane. I was getting more into Coltrane and more into quote unquote jazz. The first jazz that I was really started kind of really listening and concentrating on, and really what got me into trying to play upright from electric, was listening to the Creed Taylor CTI stuff. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, when you had, George Benson, Ron Carter, Grover Washington, a lot of those people on that particular recording, which was kind of becoming a little bit more electric kind of jazz, but still had that flavor.
Yeah.
And then, Ron Carter, with his sound from those Creed Taylor CTI recordings, I was like, well, I want to get to that sound. And actually, hearing Reggie Workman in person, I had never heard anybody of that caliber, in person. I was like, oh my goodness, it's like I want to get to that sound. And when I started, playing and was walking around campus almost in tears. I was just determined also, hearing Reggie saying you're going to want to quit, don't quit, but also I was just determined to get to that sound. I just, whatever it took, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that sound. So, yeah, Reggie was just, like I said, was a big influence. And, I started listening to, the Creed Taylor stuff, the CTI stuff, Coltrane. And I went from playing funk. Cats in my band thought I had lost it because, I never did drugs, anything like that. But they thought something had gone wrong because I went from listening to Kool and the Gang when Kool and the Gang was in what we call the Chitlin circuit, in the black circuit, to John Coltrane, Ascensions, overnight. It wasn't like, kind of get into it. I mean, I was in my dorm room and they were playing Ascensions on the radio on WMUA, and my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was in my room, and we walked in the room and I heard these cats, playing. I was like, it was out, and I was like, wow, what are these cats doing? I went to my radio and I turned it up, and it was like, people talk about a religious experience, and me coming from a religious background, to me that was a religious experience. I sat there mesmerized for like the rest of the tune, and I went out and got every Coltrane record I could possibly get. So I didn't, start with Train like with Miles and, more inside stuff. I started with Train with Ascensions, and then I went back.
Yeah.
And so it was, that was literally overnight. And then my friends, we were playing funk, Motown stuff, and they were like, man, what? And I started talking about, McCoy Tyner, I started talking, Jimmy Garrison, I started talking about all these cats, and like, man, y'all got to hear this, and blah, blah, blah. And then, like I said, this is me not using any drugs. That's the way my brain just heard that stuff immediately. I don't, and so, I used to go to study and go to sleep with my favorite things on. And so when Keter Betts, great bass player, played with Ella Fitzgerald, they came to University of Mass. I was like a junior at that time. And, I played in a singing vocal group before, the opening act, student group. And, I'm talking to Keter Betts after, and I'd only been playing bass like a year. Like I said, Reggie had just left the university, and so I said, Keter let me play his bass, and he goes, man, you hold your hands like Jimmy Garrison. I was like, you just made my year, man. I was like, telling me something like that.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen Garrison play, at all. And then I just remember just talking to Keter, and he was real nice and real forthcoming. And, I just asked him how long you've been playing. He said, well, it's not a matter of how long you've been playing, it's how intense you are when when you're studying, when you're playing. I always remembered that. And just a real gentleman, a real great cat.
What was your transition from, coming out of school to playing with some of the top cats like, Art Blakey, Archie Shepp, Wynton Marsalis, Pat Metheny? What was that really real process? And did you move to New York, or did you live somewhere else?
Well, I was really fortunate in the mid-'70s. Archie Shepp, Max Roach, Reggie Workman, Horace Boyer, Fred Tillis. And Archie Shepp took a particular interest in me. He which I called my parents. I can remember calling my father, and because Archie and Horace Boyer spent a lot of time with me, outside of the class, playing and just showing me stuff, and music, just musical stuff, not necessarily about bass. And I called my father, and I said, man, these cats are professors, and they're spending time with me outside of the class. He said, well, they obviously see something, in you, because I used to go to Archie's house when I'm playing, my first year or two playing upright. I would go to his house, and Archie would play piano. We'd play some Coltrane stuff. He goes, "Nah, man, Garrison would have played it like this," and he, played on the left hand. And so I started doing some regional gigs with Archie because I was still, a student. And then, I graduated in '76, and I graduated. My undergraduate degree was actually economics, and I minored in music. But everyone thought I was a music major because I did all the playing. Mm-hmm. But being a minor in music, if you're a composition major or a performance major or education, there's certain courses that you take. You can't take this, or But I was a music minor. Like, I leave him alone, let him take whatever he wants, because there was a small amount of requirements, and then I could take anything I want. So everyone thought I was a music major, but I wasn't. Music was my minor. And then I left school, and still every once in a while doing gigs with Archie, regional. And Charles Greenlee, great trombone player, played with Archie, and he moved from New York to Springfield, and he was putting on concerts in Springfield. He worked for the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs at that time. This was in the later 70s, 1970s, and when I got out of school, I worked for an insurance company. I had a day gig. People think, well, you sold insurance. I said, no. I was a claims adjuster. I had an expense account, company car, salary, good, nice gig for a kid out of school. Yeah. And I was starting my family, so I was, and actually my insurance gig was great in that if it took me 20 hours a week to do my gig, that was my business. If it took me 80 hours a week. So what I did, I hung with the older cats and saw how they did stuff. And I was like, okay. So cats thought they thought I was crazy because within that 3-4 years, I did a year of graduate school in music. I went back and did music performance. And I was about 2-3 bands. My family's getting bigger. And I was averaging about 4 hours of sleep a night. And, but I was on a mission. And the way I did my day gig, my insurance gig, I was a claims adjuster, and I did workman's compensation. So you hurt your back or something. I was the cat that paid you your check and made sure you went to the doctor. I used to call myself a walking, talking paycheck. And so what I did, I realized in an office situation during that time, I'm not sure what it's like now. If you an 8-hour day, you really only got maybe 4 hours of actual work done. Yeah. Between coffee breaks and the water cooler jacking with people and lunch and lollygagging. So I was like, okay. So the office opened at 8 o'clock. I got them to give me a key. I would come in at 6 o'clock, do my paperwork. So by the time 9 o'clock, 9:30 rolled around, when some people are just getting their coffee and I was out the door. Because I was doing workman's compensation, so I was supposed to be going to factories and seeing people and seeing clients. And so I would do that. So by the time 12 o'clock rolled around, I would be doing afternoon classes, big band or orchestra or whatever. And then come home, feed my daughter, and then I would go to a gig or go to a rehearsal. And either Hartford, Boston, or Springfield. And then I might get home 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, then I'm up at 5 to get to my day gig. So I did that for like 3.5-4 years. And then through that time, like I said before, Charles Greenlee was working in Springfield. He was putting together concerts. And I think in 1978, 79, I hadn't really been in contact with Archie because, I'm out doing, graduate school and day gig and my family. And so Charles said, I told Archie that he needs to hear you. He hasn't heard you in like 2 or 3 years. He needs to hear he needs to hear you. So he put together this gig with Archie, myself. I don't remember who was on drums. I'm not sure if Charlie Persep was on drums. I can't remember who was on piano. And so we did a gig with Archie. I hadn't worked with him in a couple of years, and he was like, "Wow, you know, stuff is happening." So then he was putting together a big band to go to Europe. He did the Attica Blues, you know, for the Attica riots that happened in 70, 71. He did the original recording back in, I think, 71 or 72, and then he was revamping that. So in 79, he was going to take a big band to Europe. And at that time, so there was younger cats like myself, who were like in their early 20s, and then you had what I considered older cats, like Marion Brown was in the band. That's where I met Steve Torre. Steve was, you know, a younger cat like myself. Mm-hmm. Clifford Jarvis was on drums. Art Matthews on piano. Oh my God, it should be Patience Higgins was on saxophone. John Purcell was in the band. Roy Burles was on trumpet. Oh man, I should be shot. Can't remember. Then, you know, we had guitar. We had Clyde Kreiner was on playing synthesizer, and he had strings. Akua Dixon, Steve Torre's wife at the time, she was in the string section. Terry Janor was playing violin and singing. He had another singer. So it was, and Jolie Wilson, great singer. He was one of the featured artists. Ray Copeland was the one of the band directors and arrangers. Charles Greenlee, of course, was on the tour as well. And we went to Europe, and that was my first time. I was still working my day gig, and we were supposed to do we did a recording in Paris of it was called the Attica Blues Big Band, and we were supposed to do 3 nights of recording in Paris. We only did 2 nights because they got all the material that they needed. The third night, Clyde Kreiner had written a calypso that we were playing. I was playing both electric and upright. Oh, Hakeem Jameen was playing tuba and upright. Because Archie originally when he took me to Europe, he originally wanted me to play more electric and some upright. But, you know, I was able to handle, you know, the double bass stuff just as well. So he was like, I wound up playing most of the double bass stuff. So Hakeem Jameen wound up playing more tuba. So anyway, we were playing the calypso. And this is the 3rd night that we're in Paris because we had done the recording, you know, 2 days of recording, live recording. And so Clyde had started the calypso, and I started playing. I'm playing electric on it, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, Clifford is playing something hip tonight. And I look over, it's Art Blakey on drums. So I was like, whoa, it's Art Blakey on drums. So we played the calypso, we think we played another tune. And we got, at the end of the concert, that was when I first met James Williams. James Williams comes over to me and goes, you know, boom, James Williams, blah, blah, blah. He said, Art wants to meet you. And he's all excited. I go over to Art. Yeah, you know, like you're playing, he goes, when I change my bass player, I want you to be my bass player.
Nice.
So I'm thinking, I'm like, well, he's not going to call me. So I go to Charles Greenlee, you know, after it's over. I said, man, Art said he's going to give me a call, you know, when he gets ready to change his bass player. He's not going to give me a call. And Charles looks at me, he said, if he's going to say he's going to give you a call, he'll give you a call. So we go back home, you know, I go back to my day gig, and then Archie calls me and says, I'm getting ready to do another tour, but it's with a small group. Clifford Jarvis, myself, Siegfried Kessler, German cat on piano, and good Lord, Terry Janor sang and played violin, but she came in later. And so I did I was supposed to do 4 weeks, so I took all my vacation time up front from Aetna Life and Casualty Insurance, who I worked for. And, you know, they thought I was always like I was going to be a company man. I was going to go back and get my MBA, you know, I'm a company man. And they said, well, we heard you play music. I said, it's a hobby. But really, in my mind, the insurance gig was my part-time gig.
Yeah,
and music was my major gig. And so I took my 4 weeks up front, and I said, well, I got some business to take care of, family stuff, and we're going to go away. And so I never really told them that, I'm playing with Archie Sharpe or these great people. So we get over there, and Archie extends it a week, so we're there 5 weeks. So I'm like, wow, okay. But in the interim, about halfway through the tour, I call home, and my wife goes, Art Blakey called, says he wants you to be in his band. I was like, what? So she goes, yeah, you need to give him a call. She goes, also your job called too, because they're wondering why, you're away, longer than what you said.
Yeah.
So I call Art, tell him, I'm in Europe, blah, blah, blah. I'll see him when I get back. So when I got back, but in the interim, I called my day job. I called him Etna, and I called the manager, and I called him from Italy. It's not like it is now where you got the WhatsApp and Italy and
easy things.
Yeah, especially during that time, Italy, the phone system was just horrid. I mean, it was. Sometimes I wouldn't even, when I would go on tour, my wife wouldn't hear from me. She knew that I was in Italy. She just looked at the itinerary. Oh, he's in Italy. He's not gonna. So I go to the post office. I call. The connection, like I said back then, it was just crazy. So I call, and all you hear is, John. Yeah, Avery, is that you? Yeah, that's me, John. Sorry. Yeah. He goes, where are you? I said, well, I'm out. He goes, are you in Europe? I've been hearing rumors. I said, bad connection, John. I can't really hear you. I'll talk to you when I get back. Boom. So then I came back, and like anything else, if you're away from a job for 5 weeks, you're going to be behind. So my files are, but it takes you a couple of months to catch up. But in the interim, there was a guy who was not in my line he wasn't my supervisor or anything, but he wasn't that crazy about me. So he went through my files and saw that I was behind. And I'm like, no kidding, Sherlock. I've been gone 5 weeks. Whoever goes away, you're going to be behind.
Yeah.
So during that time, now I've got to make a decision whether or not I'm going to do my day gig and continue to do music like on the side. Now I've got Art Blakey calling me, asking me to be in his group. So am I going to leave my job? So in the interim, Art Blakey and McCoy had the same management, Jack Whittemore. Mm. And Charles Fambro was playing with McCoy. And Charles left McCoy. Because everyone thinks that, even James Williams, I talked to James thought that Charles Fambro and I had switched gigs. I went with McCoy, and he came with Art. I said, no, Charles and I never talked. Charles didn't know me like that. I didn't know him that well. I knew of Charles because Charles was playing with cats like Grover Washington. I mean, he was like one of the cats I looked up to.
Yeah.
But we didn't know each other where I can call him on the phone. Hey, man. No, I said, I called Jack Whittemore. I said, Jack, I heard that McCoy's bass player left. Can you ask McCoy to give me a call? He goes, well, you're with Art. I said, I know I'm with Art, but just have him give me a call. I just want to talk to him. So McCoy's calling my day gig, but we never hooked up. In the interim, that's where I met, the first night that I played with Art, Curtis Lundy was showing me the book, because he was kind of filling in for Fambro, because Curtis was playing with Betty Carter at the time. And so the first night that I played with Art, an 18-year-old Wynton Marsalis comes and sits in with the band. So that's where I met Wynton, and became friends. And I told Art, I said, look, Art, I still got my day gig. I need about a month to clean things up before I can start going on the road. Are you cool with that? He goes, yeah, that's no problem. So we do a few gigs, but they're on the weekend, so I'm fine. And then we did Lulu White's in Boston. Wynton came down and sat in because Branford Marsalis was at Berkeley. Kevin Eubanks, that's where I met Kevin. Terry Lynn Carrington was 14 years old, and I thought she was crazy because we're in the dressing room, and she goes, I knew her father, but I didn't know Terry. She's a kid.
Yeah.
And she goes, I wonder if Boo's gonna let me sit in tonight. I'm thinking to myself, what's wrong with this little girl? She thinks that Art Blakey's gonna let her sit in. So I didn't think too much of it. Kevin Eubanks sat in. I think Donald Harrison, I believe, sat in. A bunch of cats, because Billy Pierce was in the band at the time. And so at the end of the night, calls Terry up, and she starts playing. I'm like, oh my God, this little girl can play. But anyway, at the end of that run, we were there like 3 or 4 nights, I can't remember. And McCoy had been trying to reach me. So we're in the dressing room the last night with Art. Art goes, okay, we're getting ready to go to, I think he said Cleveland on Tuesday. I said, Art, I told you, man, I needed a month to clean up my stuff, to get my day gig. He goes off. He just stops listening. He goes, goes to Bobby Watson. Bobby, I don't know what's wrong with these bass players and blah, blah, blah. He's just going off. So while he's doing that, the bartender comes in the dressing room and goes, Avery, there's a call for you at the bar. I pick it up. Yeah, Avery, it's McCoy Tyner. They're trying to reach you. Can you come down for audition or rehearsal tomorrow? This was like we ended the gig on Sunday night. I said, I guess so. I guess I'm not in Art's band no more, because he just. So I went down, did the audition and the rehearsal, and I destroyed the first tune. I didn't play it. It was Festival in Bahia, and it had all these bass jumps. I jacked it up. And I remember thinking, I got to apologize for Mr. Tyner for wasting your money, bringing me down here. But then he called the next tune, and I was cool.
Yeah.
And then we did a gig. I said, so we were doing. He had a gig for that weekend. We did 2 nights in Ann Arbor, and I said, McCoy, I need about a month to get my act together here, because I'm still doing my day gig. He said, no problem. He said, we're not really going on tour till next month, so you're fine. And McCoy said something to me that blew my mind, because I'm like 24, 25, and McCoy Tyner's like, at the end of the 2 nights, he goes, man, I got a good feeling about you. He goes, I was telling my wife, he goes, I really got a real good feeling about you. He goes, I think we've been put together for a reason. I was like, wow.
That's great, yeah.
And then, 22 years later, the funny thing about it was, Art was upset with me for the longest. He wouldn't even talk to me. He wouldn't take my calls, because he thought that I would give up my day gig for McCoy, but wouldn't give up my day gig for him. And he wouldn't take my calls. And as a matter of fact, when I was on tour with McCoy, I wrote Art a letter explaining, hey man, I love you. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to play with you. As I explained to you before, I needed a month to get my affairs in order with my day gig, and you were ready to go on tour. I'm sorry about that, but it had nothing to do with me wanting to play, with me picking McCoy over you. It was just a matter of logistics. It just didn't, but it did also happen. I did want to play with McCoy. He's like one of the main cats I really wanted to play with, as well as Art. Yeah. But it did. McCoy's like, and it was, a funny thing happened when I was on tour with Archie. 2-3 months before that, during my second tour with Archie, we were on the train, and Terry Janor was there, and I was, there, and somehow we got on the subject of who you always wanted to play with, and I can't remember who Archie said, and so Terry said, well, I always wanted to play with Archie. I said, well, and I had never expressed this to anybody before. I said, well, I said, I love Archie, but I said the cat that I always wanted to play with was McCoy Tyner. I had never said that out loud, ever. Yeah. And then 2 months, 3 months later, I'm playing with the cat. So that kind of stuff, I couldn't tell you how to do that. I didn't move to New York. I never moved to New York. I tell people I literally came out of the woods of Amherst and started playing with people like McCoy, Art Blakey, and everybody else, who started, because that. I mean, I don't know. How do you do that? That's just in the stars. That's just
It's just
fate.
the energy.
Yeah.
Something happened.
The vortex or whatever, the planets lined up. And I didn't move to New York. People were trying to get me to move to New York, but I've always been about being a human being first, and I come from a large family. Some people come from large families, and it's not a good experience. Mine was a great experience. We were, all loved each other. And it was really a contradiction. I spoke a lot to my parents before I started going on the road, because it was a contradiction for me not to be with my family. Then my mother, who reminded me, she said, "Well, your father was gone a lot because he was in the service," and I forgot. She goes, "But it's the way he dealt with it. It's how you deal with it, as a parent." So I was like, So, I had a house, a couple acres of land, car payment, quote unquote middle America, before I started, being a musician full time. So I felt that, the cost of living was much cheaper in Massachusetts than it was in New York or New Jersey. There are probably some things I missed out on by not being in New York during that time, but it was more important for me to know that my family was cool, and it was the only way that I could be on the road in good conscience, because my wife had a big support system. She's from Springfield. I come from a large family. Most of them were still there, at that time, and so she had a big support system. I'm the one that chose to do this, not them. So I would go sleep on somebody's floor in Brooklyn, or like my boy Ronnie Barrage, who's actually on my, I met with McCoy Tyner, and Ronnie's on my last record. I would go and sleep on Ronnie's floor for a $50 gig in Brooklyn, back in the early '80s. But I'm not going to put my family through that, because I chose to do this. So whatever I can do to keep them comfortable, so I can, my drug of choice is music. So whatever I have to do to keep them cool, because the cooler they are, the cooler I can be. You know what I mean? And that just comes from my father, the way he was always the most proud of his family, and that he was able to clothe and feed and love 8 kids. So that yeah, that's kind of the way that is.
Well, what would be some of the main highlights for you playing with McCoy Tyner? And did he tell you any cool Coltrane stories, or?
Yeah, every so often, I think one of the reasons why McCoy and I were together for so long is that parts of our personalities were very similar. McCoy's not gonna. He's not going to overreact, and that's one of the things I learned from him, is like, okay, you're on the road, you're always going to have, hassles, things come up, some cats will just go off, and why? Whereas he'll just be calm, and he's already thinking about, okay, plan A didn't work, let's go to plan B. He's putting his energy right into going to plan B, into solving the situation, rather than, holding your behind, whining about it. So I was like, okay, cool. That's kind of the way my father would kind of handle stuff. It's from being in the service, you don't, a person's head gets blown off. You don't sit there and freak out. You're in the midst of battle. You freak out later on, but in the midst of battle, you got to handle, or you're going to get killed. Mm-hmm. So just watching him, how he dealt with stuff. I mean, McCoy's not going to really sit you down and tell you, this is what I do. He does more by example. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way my temperament is. That, like I said, coming from my father and him being in the service, you spend the energy into solving the situation rather than reacting emotionally to it. I mean, because you're in the heat of battle, you have to do that. And just if I could say anything about McCoy, the thing that really impressed me and blew my mind is his consistency and intensity in playing all the time. It wasn't like, like we might be off, the band might be off for like a month or so, and I'm thinking, everybody's been playing and practicing, but it's not like, if you play every night, there's a certain level of intensity, a certain level of vibe that you get, from playing like that. But, once like I said, it's like being in the heat of battle. Now you're resting and you kind of got to get back up to it. McCoy, it would be almost like we hit the last note 30 days ago. Boom, that intensity. I was like, dang, that's like, and the only other cat who was even close to that, I felt, was Joe Ford. Joe, not like McCoy, but, that's like, wow, Joe is like, boom, he's like there. So that, no one tells you that. You observe that, and you're like, okay, this is the level that you got to go to. And because I used to talk to Joe Ford about this, some cats, bass players don't, McCoy would just lay out. Boom, you got it. Some cats didn't like that. I love that because it's like, here you got McCoy just got through playing everything under the sun, and now there's silence. Now, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So you can either, at that point, you can be a wimp, or you can try to, you rise to the occasion. I like it. It's a challenge for me because, like, now this cat just got through playing everything under the sun. I've got to rise at least up to that level. And when you have that opportunity, now you're starting to hear stuff as well. Because I just got through hearing all this massive stuff that he got through playing. So what am I going to play to kind of bring that stuff up to that level? And you start searching for different things on the bass that you can do. Start searching for different sounds. And sometimes when people hear me play, they go, sometimes, wow, it looks like you're a little bit of pain. I'm like, yeah, because sometimes I'm going for a sound and I don't think about it, and I'll hit a part of my hand that I hadn't planned on hitting just to get that sound. And I'm like, yeah, because. So I love that about McCoy, and I love being in the trio because people say when they would hear the trio, it would sound bigger, sound more than three people. Number one, because of the way McCoy plays, but then also the space that he allows you makes you grow. It's like I said, you have to come up to that level. It's like, boom, now you got it. What you gonna do with it? So, in terms of moments, special moments, I think Louis Hayes said it best. One time we did a concert with the trio, and McCoy and Louis and myself, and a person, after we did the concert, a person comes back. People come backstage, and they're all excited, and they said, "Man, this was a special night. Did it really feel special tonight?" And Louis looks at me and looks at them and goes, "Every night's special. That's why we do it,
Yeah.
Every night's special." But if I can think of one incident that really sticks out in my mind, it was a trio gig with myself and Louis and McCoy. We did like 4 or 5 weeks in Europe, and which, the reception is great, but then we came right back from Europe and did the Atlanta Jazz Festival, which we're back in the States. Atlanta, a lot of black folks. We're in Piedmont Park, a lot of black folks. People went berserk. It was like the energy, it's like, oh, we're home. And not only we're home, we're around people who look like us. And the energy, the people started moving closer and closer to the stage. People were dancing. We were playing the blues and people were dancing. Young folks. It was just special. And after the performance, McCoy and I and Louis looked at each other. We're like, man, that was like incredible. It's like we've been touring around Europe. Like I said, we're getting a great reception, but the music is from here. The vibe, this is just me talking, in my opinion, the vibe and the spirit is from here. So those people, they felt that, and it was like, oh yeah, they were reminding us that, yeah, this is where that energy comes from. So that's to me, that was one of the highlights all those years of playing. I mean, like I said, they're all special, but I remember that vividly just because of the contrast from Europe to coming home to playing with a bunch of black folks.
Yeah,
just,
yeah. Well, you also work with some other real heavyweights while you're with McCoy, like, Joe Henderson, Freddie Hubbard, Woody Shaw, George Benson. Do you have any stories about some of those guys?
Well, just incredible musicians. I mean, like I said, I was just fortunate that, I worked with those cats and in a setting and with McCoy. And just the level of playing, in some of those situations, I was the youngest person there. And so just watching these cats, Freddie was, is just on fire. I mean, sometimes he would be playing, it would just lift the whole bandstand up. He's just an incredible player. And Freddie was really serious about the music. I mean, Freddie had, we all have our thing, but when it came to music, he was like, the seriousness, and that has always impressed me. That's one of the things that first impressed me about Max Roach and Archie, how they approached the music, the seriousness, as if they were a brain surgeon or something. Mm-hmm. And so to be around cats, that, they're your idols and, famous and all that, but then when you see how they really deal with the music, you're like, snap. Everybody on that particular level deals with the music like that. Yeah, and Joe Henderson was definitely one of the most brilliant cats I knew, and in terms of a lot of saxophone players, fortunately that I worked with were brilliant intellectual-wise, is what I thought were, Yusef Lateef, Archie Sharpe, Von Freeman, Joe was extraordinary cat, really brilliant, really brilliant. He used to, Joe could figure out whatever country we were in, he could figure out the language. And I was like, wait a minute, we'd be in Japan, he'd speak
like 10 languages, right?
I'd be like, Joe, what's... So then we'd be in Italy, I'd be like, Joe, what's happening? He goes, well, a lot of your musical terms are Italian. I was like, wow, I never thought about it. He goes, yeah, so just use that. And I was like, so just an incredible player, a logical player, and, and I mean, I think one of the things I really loved about those cats, and I love about music, and even people like Duke Ellington, they're always reaching for something, they're always striving for something. I remember we were we did a quartet with Freddie Hubbard, McCoy, and the trio, and we were like in Munich and Freddie's playing flugelhorn or playing trumpet. He looks at his trumpet and looks at McCoy. He goes, if I could play trumpet like you played piano, I'd be really, And I'm thinking this to myself, this cat is already playing everything under the sun, but he's still trying to still reaching for something, still trying to take stuff, somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, boy, some of the guys you played with, one of my favorite records after I figured it out, Yusef Lateef, like Eastern Sounds, and
Mm-hmm.
Boy, it's interesting that some of those guys, they settled in Massachusetts and they were over in that area,
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was just lucked up and in the right place, and Yusef was in this area for years, and earlier when he was here, I didn't know Yusef, and then I think he went to Africa and lived for a while, and then came back, and I didn't really get with Yusef until the early 90s. And he started his own record label in the late 80s, early 90s. And I must have done about 8 or 9 records with him.
Wow.
And, Yusef won a Grammy in New Age. He was like, what is New Age, And, the stuff that he was doing on his own label called YAL, Y-A-L, was definitely more outside. Yusef had, done the whole thing with Cannonball and a whole bunch of other people, and he was more searching for sounds. Yusef was older than John Coltrane, if Train had lived. And one of the things I really loved about Yusef is, and he and I used to talk. I used to call him once a month, and just say, Yusef, just say talk, because every time I have a conversation with you, I learn something. And I might be calling up, complaining about something, and he goes, well, Brother Avery, in 1959, and I'd be like, oh yeah, right, but yeah, right, Yusef, you've been around much longer than I have.
Yeah.
You've dealt with stuff, and he would point out I'd be complaining about something. He would point out the positive that I had gotten. I'm still ahead of the game. But whatever it was, and he and I used to talk about. Yusef was a great person too, not just a great musician. He was a walking encyclopedia of music, but he and I used to talk about that. He was more concerned about being a good person. I mean, everybody's different,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, before we kind of wind up, I kind of wanted to know, you started your own label, and you were basically doing that from the 90s, and what are a little about that and some of your future projects on the horizon?
Well, speaking about Yusef Lateef, and Yusef started his own label, and this was in the early 90s, and around 92, 93, I had done my first record with Sunnyside Records, Francois Zalakan, back in 1988. Was my first record, and I did it with Ronnie Barrage, Clyde Kreiner on piano, Guillermo Franco, John Blake violin, Joe Ford saxophones, and McCoy Tyner played on one of the tunes. Actually, I did his tune Blues on the Corner, where I did the hum along bass style, perfected by Slam Stewart and Major Holly. Where you scat.
Yeah, you do it pretty well.
You scat and along with the bass. Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I did a gig opposite Slam Stewart and Illinois Jaquette. They had a band, and we were at Sweet Basil's in New York when it was open at the time, and I was playing with a piano player that I went to school with at UMass, and actually I've known him since junior high, Mark Purcelli. And Mark was doing solo, I think, at Sweet Basil's, and also he put together a band. We were doing a New Year's Eve gig, and they had Illinois Jaquette and Slam Stewart, and I can't remember who else was playing with them, but we opened up for them. We were the band like in between, and and I was bowing, I think So What or something like that. So Slam comes up to me and goes, "Hey man, I really like your bowling." I was like, "Man, forget about me. You're the cat." I said, "Tell me what's going on. You're the cat that's scats with the bow."
Yeah.
And so he gave me the whole history of what he was trying to do. He said I was trying to imitate violin players, scatting. And historically, people always give for bass. People always give Jimmy Blanton, bass player with Duke Ellington, 1930s, late 1930s, early 1940s. Mm-hmm. They give Jimmy Blanton the credit for bringing the bass from the background and playing kind of horn lines. And I say no, it was Slam Stewart.
No,
but
Slam. Yeah.
Slam was playing melodies. But it was considered a novelty. Mm-hmm. Slim and Slam. So my contention is that no, Slam is the first cat that really started taking the bass and playing melodies. And so anyway, he's running down the whole history. And I'm like, great cat. And I said, well, man, I would really like to try that. He goes, I said, like Major Holly does, but Major does it the same octave. He says, I can't do it the same octave, do an octave higher. So I went home, working on it, and I was like, oh, I see why everybody doesn't do it, because you got to, your pitch has to be pretty much on. Mm-hmm. And so I did a demo. Well, I did my first record in 88, but I did, McCoy put together the trio in 84 with Louis Hayes and myself. And Herb Wong, who was at Palo Alto Records, I had sent him a demo. And on the demo, I'm scatting. So McCoy, we did first trio record I did with McCoy. We're in the studio, and Herb goes, McCoy, would you mind if Avery played No Greater Love, and he scattered on it, with the bow. McCoy was like, cool. So that was the first time that I actually did it on a recording. Mm-hmm. And then later on I did it on my record, 4 years later. But talking about why I started my own label was Yusef Lateef had started his own label, like I think it was 91, 92, and I'd done like 8 recordings with him. And I was talking to Kevin Eubanks, and Kevin had just started the Tonight Show, with Jay Leno. And so Kevin and I were talking. Whenever I'd be playing out there, I would hang with Kevin. And somehow we started talking about the music industry. And Kevin goes, well, man, the label thing is going to be over. You might as well start your own label.
Yeah. And
then Kevin said that to me. Then I remember I got back home and I ran into Yusef Lateef. And I had spoken briefly about trying to maybe start my own label. And Yusef goes, Brother Avery, I think you should start your own label. He goes, I'll help you if you need help. And so those were the 2 cats that really started me and, thinking about starting my own label. I had done a record with Francois for Sunnyside Records. And I was like, I think one thing that musicians forget, especially jazz musicians, is that we play some very sophisticated music, some of the most difficult music on the planet, which means I used to get into discussions with some, my contemporaries about that. We play some of the most sophisticated music on the planet. I mean, there's a heart and cerebral and a spiritual thing that goes along with it, but there's a heavy intellectual thing that we're doing. There's a part of our brain that's more highly developed than the average person. I mean, every human being has that, whether it's carpentry, you might see, you walk into a room and you can see something that you have a talent for, that you have a knack for. And my whole thing is like, well, I'm talking about musicians. We all have that. It might be in something different. But with musicians, there's a part of our brain that's more highly developed than the average person. So why can't we take some of those same neurons and transfer it to everything? So if I can figure out what Oscar Pettiford's playing or Oscar Peterson is playing, I can pretty much figure out anything, because that's some hard stuff. So I always just take the approach that, okay, I want to start a label. Well, snap. I just got through playing this hard behind music. Why should I go to somebody who knows less about the music and who doesn't have the intellectual prowess I have for this music?
Yeah.
I don't care if you did produce so-and-so back in the day. When's the last time you played on stage with him? You didn't. So if I can figure out the music, why can't I figure out? I can pretty much figure out anything. And once I've kind of always been that way, is that if I can figure out one thing, yes, we all have knacks, or we have things that we might be attracted to, but you can kind of figure it out. So I can figure out the business of it. I mean, I'm an economics major. I studied economics. So I said, after Yusef said it, we should try it, I did it. And quite honestly, I just got tired of going to people who, as we say in the business, couldn't hear a door slam.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
You know, just because you sit behind a desk and you're the gatekeeper doesn't mean that you really know the music. You know, if we're talking art, you know, you're supposed to sell the music. You know, that's Norman Granz. You know, y'all do what you do. I'll sell the music. That's what you're supposed to do. But as we see, it's evolved to a whole nother place. And it's good that I started doing it then. I mean, now everybody has their own label because the industry is, I don't know what this is anymore. I don't even know I know what this is anymore. But I did every aspect of the industry. You know, I was my own publicist. I called the radio stations. I called the newspapers. I called Downbeat. I called these places. I sent out all the records and, you know, did my own promotion, did my own booking, my gigs. You know, I was the CEO of the record label, and I was also the janitor of the. You know, so I did every aspect of it, and it was a great learning experience. So now when people do their own records, I mean, everything has changed because the promotion is totally different. You got the internet. You know, CDs. They don't even make CD players anymore. They don't put them in computers. They don't put them in cars. So, and I always think back. You know, when CDs first came out, people were saying, "Oh, CDs are going to destroy the industry." No, it didn't. This is a little different because people still had to pay for things. Now, you know, you have generations who are now used to getting everything for free, and now everything is streamed, which means that the artists don't get jack. You know, before when I used to do a record, you know, when I started my label, I could, you know, kind of make my money back. Now it's just promo. It's just, you know, I'm spending a gazillion dollars just, you know, for promo to try to get gigs. So, and that's not to be discouraging. I always feel it's like whenever people in the U.S. say, well, there's not enough money to do this, there's not enough money to do. That's a bunch of bull. There's enough money to do everything we need to do. It's just that you focus the money in where you want. You focus the money in defense. Defense is heavy, you know, so we have the money. It's just you don't put the money where it needs to go. So monies can still be made in the business. It's just that it is shifted. How do you put, you know, you have to figure out, you have to follow that stream. You know, that's why they call money, you know, cash flow. It flows it's there. It's just flowed away from you to another place. So you have to get, you know, your buckets or whatever and try to catch it. So, and, you know, people are always asking me, because the industry has changed so much, if I was a young person coming up, would I get into it? And honestly, I have to say yes, because I'm crazy. But, you know, you have to have a certain drive to want to do this no matter what. And so, yes, I would. I would just try to figure out another way to make it work. Whether I would be successful, I don't know. I hope that I would be. But I think that's one of the things I kind of like about Quincy Jones. I mean, I don't know Quincy. You know, I've met him. But I think his ability to change, a lot of people might have given him a lot of flack about it, but you know, that's why he's still here. You know, he didn't hold his behind saying, "Oh, the industry's doing." Okay, this is where it's going. Let me get in front of it. You know? So, does that mess with the art? Yes and no. You know, if people don't know about the art, then, you know.
What would be your advice to a young jazz bassist starting out? You know, you started out on electric and then got into upright. Well, I've met some guys like Ron, just like you really need to focus on one instrument because otherwise you have to put all the time on another instrument too, you know, and those type of things. What would you recommend for a young player who's just starting, looking to get into jazz? Some of the things that you would recommend and the books and.
Well, I think, you know, that's one approach. It all depends on the individual. I understand what what they're saying about focusing in on one thing, because I quite honestly, I have spent most of my time on upright. But since my electric is all self-taught, I can kind of pretty much do what I want. It's not it's there. It's always there. What I would suggest, and this is, like I said, it all depends on the individual. Yes, I would focus in on one thing, but no, I would try to do it all. I'm sorry. I would just. If you got 10 kids and a wife, or 2 wives, or whatever, yeah, your time is limited. But if you're just coming up and you don't, you're single and free, or you're just, no, I would just try it all. Try to learn as much as I can about bass. One thing I wish I had done, and actually Howard Johnson, great tuba player, had spoken to me about this, and I actually had spoken to about it with Rudy Stevenson, who used to, guitar player, harmonica, used to do a lot of contracting on Broadway in the black shows in the 70s. And a lot of cats who played, people forget that bass players back in the day used to be the tuba players. When the music moved inside, they started playing bass. So a lot of cats could play tuba and bass. And back when I first started, Howard Johnson used to always encourage me to do tuba, which I wish I had done. I just not crazy about wind instruments, in terms of playing.
Yeah.
But no, I would tell a young person to, which maybe I could be wrong, but nobody ever tells you. We don't know how to get from point A to point B, because if you have 20,000 cats, you're gonna have 20,000 different ways of approaching it. And I would say, if you spend 15 hours a day on music, spend 1 hour or maybe 2 hours trying to figure out the business of music, where it is. Because I can practice till the cows come home, but if nobody hears it, or if I can't put it in front of people, so there is, like I said, we're using another part of our brain. Like I said, there's an intellectual part that's more developed than the average person from playing and improvising. Move those neurons over to how do I get my music out there? How do I get the business? How do I, how do I feed my family? How do I feed myself? Or, but if I was young and didn't have anything else happening, I would just try to absorb as much as I could. But be serious with it. You don't want to be the jack of all trades and the master of none. But if whatever you feel the most comfortable with, put a lot of that time in it, because it won't come all at one time. I'm a composer. That didn't come all at one time. I focused in on bass, but then I started focusing on other stuff as well. The business part of it, the composing part of it. So how do I put my music out there? When you're young, you work hard. As you get older, you start to try to work smarter. But if you're young, you should try to work hard and smart, because you still have the energy. And so no, I would say, focus in on one thing, but just have those other things still going on, Yeah. But it depends on the individual. I feel that it can be done. It depends on how much time you want to put into it. Depends on the amount of work. Depends on your knack for it, But I would sit back and just really try to figure out. We're going to spend most of your time, obviously, on the instrument, on the art, but you have to put in some time on stepping back and where is this juggernaut going? Where is it headed? And then you have to put some energy into that. You can't just be in the practice room. You got to come out at some point.
definitely. Well, the final question before we end. You are one of those cats that really focuses hard on health and the health aspect of your life as well. And you were doing vegetarian, and now you're vegan. And
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about that and your thinking? I know a few other guys who are like that. One of another bassist I know, Marcus McLaurin, is very he's vegetarian. And
Yeah, Marcus is a bad cat.
yeah, a lot of.
Marcus is a great cat.
How
Well-
does that help you and your aspect of bass playing? And
Well, you know, like I said, when I used to discuss with Yusef Lateef, we're human beings first. And in order for me to be a good bass player, I have to be a good human being, whatever that takes, you know, whether it's spiritual and physically. If I can't physically play the bass, then it's, you know, I mean, health is everything. You know, nothing happens without health. So, I mean, and I was, you know, I was an athlete when I was young. I'm still an athlete. I still consider myself an athlete. And I was one of those people that took the stuff seriously. You know, the cats on the box of Wheaties. You know, want to eat Wheaties because it makes it strong. You know, so when I was wrestling, you know, we had to do weight control because you have to wrestle in a weight class. And my oldest daughter used to call us a bunch of anorexic boys. So I started thinking about diet because, you know, at that time I was eating, you know, with the standard American diet, and I ate, you know, ham, pork, and that kind of stuff. And at that time, you know, like ham would have a lot of salt in it, and if you wanted to, you know, lose weight, you know, you don't do a lot of salt. And plus I was reading the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's book, How to Eat to Live, because, you know, the black Muslims were prominent in the black community, and every other word in his book is "don't eat pork." So that kind of made an impression on me. You know, I wasn't into the Nation of Islam, but you know, I would read their stuff, and trying to be a good athlete. So I stopped eating pork at 16, and then because one of my best friends. You know, because I'm a gourmet cook now, I'm a vegan cook, and he says, man, I remember when you just used to eat just bland stuff, you know, because I was trying to keep my weight, and try to stay healthy. So then when I got to college, you know, people were talking, you know, about being a vegetarian, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't think too much of it. And then when I first got out of college and got married and had my daughter, and you know, I'd been thinking about vegetarianism, and, you know, I look a lot like my father. We all do. And we were at my father's and mother's house, and we're celebrating my oldest daughter's first year birthday. And so, you know, at the end of the party, you know, my father's laying on the floor. You know, my father always looked like he was like 6 months pregnant because he had a big belly.
Yeah.
So my daughter and I had needles. We had a bunch of balloons. We're popping balloons. And I said, well, we're all out of balloons. And she looks at my father's stomach and goes, a balloon. Stuck the needle in his stomach. And he goes, ow. And everyone's, you know, like laughing. And it was like, I wasn't laughing because I was looking at my father on the floor, and I was like, you're looking at the future. You look just like this cat. So I said, it was, you know, everyone was laughing, but something just changed. I was like, no. And right after that, I became vegan. And so when I first went on the road, I was vegan. And I used to cook my own. For about a year, I cooked my own food when I was on the road. So I used to carry pots, and it was crazy. But that's how committed I am when I do something. And then that was for like about 3 or 4 years, about 4 years. And then I started, when I became a vegan, and about for a year of that 4 years, I was on the road. I started going on the road, and this was before Whole Foods and all this other stuff.
Oh yeah.
So it was much more difficult.
Oh, it's still hard.
And I used to get books on vegetarianism of where to go, like in Europe. like we'd be in Denmark, you know, so you look, you have to get the map, and you go there and you find out the place has been closed. You know, it's not like the internet.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I said, okay, you're in the middle of Germany somewhere, and you're like, well, I'm a vegetarian. Yeah, we have Venus schnitzel. So I said, all right, I'll go back to eating fish and some dairy and eggs. So for about 4 years, I was vegan, and then I was like lacto-ovo vegetarian, and with fish. And then that would happen for about 12 years, and then probably about 25 years ago, I went back to being vegan, pure vegan. Because then, you know, you started having Whole Foods pop up, you started having more ma and pa places go up, so it made it a little bit easier. But I just, you know, I'm still, like I said, I'm still an athlete, slowing down a little bit, you know, I don't do half marathons anymore. But, you know, I worked out, used to lift weights, and all that helped me play bass. And when people see me play bass, they go like, wow, you have a lot of energy. I'm like, well, yeah. You know, I can't be the age that I'm at now, and, you know, the bass, you know, you hit the bass, it'll hit you back. You know, so you have to bring a little bit, some strength and some kind of energy. And I feel like in life, it's not just vegan or plant-based or being a vegetarian or whatever fad diet people are on now. It's not about that, because I know vegetarians and vegans who are dogs. You know, they're not nice people. So I would say 25% of it is diet, 25% of it is movement or athletics, and 50% of it is spirituality, or the vibe. You know, because I mean, I know people who, like I said, are not nice people, and so yeah, I mean, and plus, I mean, I hate to get into this, but I mean, I'm lying. I don't hate this. I want to get into this. The one thing that we have control over is what we put in our mouth. Nobody ties you down and stuffs this stuff. You go pay money, and you have to educate yourself about what it is that you're putting in your body. Because I mean, that to me, what I put in my body, or what people say that I can put in my body, be it, you know, I'm going off a little bit, be it the government or whatever, that's when you'll see another Avery. Because that to me is what it is to be an American, is to have control over this space for however long I'm going to be here. For you not to intrude upon that, whether it be physically trying to harm me, or tell me that I got to do this, I got to take that, or, you know, and I have control over what, you know, people say, well, you know, you're vegan, you don't eat meat. I said, well, if I was on a desert island, there was no plants, and there was pigs running around, guess what? I'm eating that pig to survive.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate I live in a society where I have a choice. You know, we live in an affluent society where you don't have to, you know, at this point, you're choosing to do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm fortunate I live in a society where it allows me to do that. But not only that, I mean, eating meat or not eating meat, it helps the environment. You know, I mean, I can go into a whole thing about that.
Yeah.
You know, so to me, it's you know, very important, very important.
Well, Avery, thanks for doing this interview, and people can find you at your website, or?
Yep, www.AverySharpe with an E.com. Yeah, all my stuff is available on digital streaming. I've got a new record that came out last month. As we know, this is the 400th year that Africans were brought to the shores of North America in Virginia, 1619, and this is 2019. So my new record is called 400, an African-American musical suite. African-American musical portrait. And I have great people on there like Kevin Eubanks on guitar, Ronnie Barrage on drums, Don Braden on saxophone, Dwayne Eubanks on trumpet, Zakai Curtis on piano, also Davis Whitfield on piano on a couple of tracks. I got a choir on there with my brother and my sister and the rest of my relatives. It's called the Extended Family Choir. I've got some strings on there, so it's I go through century by century of what happened. I think Kevin Eubanks said it best. He said it's like a soundtrack to history. It's not just a regular CD. I've kind of moved over to projects where, I always like giving things a purpose. As I did an interview a while back saying I guess I've kind of become the history guy. My album before this was a tribute to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Before that, Sojourner Truth. Before that, Running Man, Jesse Owens. So I'm, writing and trying to do things from what I know.
Yeah.
So look for the new record out, and just hope to see folks around. If they see my name at a gig, come on out. Support the music. The music's never gonna die. I feel anyway. Might get a little thin around the edges, but I don't think it's ever gonna die.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Avery.
Thank you.